Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you all this evening. Thanks very much for joining and for your time having this conversation. You all can see the slide okay, right? Just checking. Great. Okay, good. All right. So because we're a smallish group, let's make this more of a conversation. I'll pause, and if you've got any points, by all means chip in or just interrupt me, is absolutely fine. I want to keep you awake. It's 8:30 here on the other coast, so I need to keep myself awake as well. All right, so the topic is about the focus on customer value in the programs that you're working on. And just to emphasize that point, let's go back to first principles, or the first principle of the Agile Manifesto, which clearly states that the whole point is to deliver value. So whilst the Agile Manifesto has been around now for two or three decades, about 23 years, something like that, 20 years, something like that. So the pursuit of value or the attainment of value still remains elusive in a lot of cases. We've all worked on programs, have we not? If we're being honest, where 6 months in, we've launched and nobody used it. So not good. And there's reasons for that, but there's many, many different kinds of reasons for that. And we're going to explore some of those and see what we can do and what you all can do as practitioners with agency to address that. So what we'll do is we'll spend about 15 minutes briefly going over one of the ways in which Bloomberg tries to address that challenge. How do we deliver more value to customers? And that's in the form of our program called Learning About Our Customers. It does exactly what it says on the label. It's not an easy thing to remember, but I've realized that sometimes is a good way to help people remember it, because they have to really try hard and remember the mnemonic. And then we'll do a little exercise to keep us active, and you can have a go at asking each other questions in pairs. So be ready for that. There is work to be done. And then we'll come back and talk about some other ways to integrate this customer focus, this value focus into programs. And then we'll spend the rest of the time discussing together. So an overview of the Learning About Our Customers program at Bloomberg. First, you have to realize that Bloomberg is quite complex organization. You can think of it as a mini internet is what we're providing to our customers. There is a network, there are applications, there is data, there's content that's provided to financial services professionals all across the world in lots of different roles, in lots of different kinds of organizations. There is a community that exists on that platform that uses that platform to communicate and share information. So it is a secure, reliable platform offering content, applications, etc. And so there's lots of people in the organization doing lots of different kinds of things. So I just want to set that scene for you, because that's the context in which we're trying to deliver more customer value. So here comes this program called Learning About Our Customers. As a simple objective to harvest, to enhance, and then share best practices for doing the piece of the software development lifecycle, the effort where you're looking for customer insight and feedback, and then holding yourselves accountable to that in the life cycle. So that's what the program is all about. Realizing very early on, of course, we practiced what we preached. So the first step was to learn about our customers. So we had a discovery phase where we talked to product managers and engineers and salespeople and all kinds of different roles. How do they do this today? And what are some of the challenges that they face? And that then shaped the program. It also gave us a bit of awareness raising about the issues around the company, kicked us off, if you will. And then ever since, the whole program has been highly participative. There is no team. There is a team, but it's all volunteers. Only myself, and that only in the last 12 months, has this as part of their job. Everyone else is volunteers. It's highly participative, and that's the key, or one of the keys to making this effective. The other is to realize that, this is a company challenge. This is a business process for a company to understand its customers and bring that into the products it develops, and therefore requires this constant nurturing and care, refinement, enhancement to that process across the organization. And so there are LAOC programs in each of these 5 parts. These are all the 5 parts of the organization that are dealing with product development, and it looks very different in each one because their context is different. What they're trying to achieve organizationally in sales is to sell product, but while doing that, they have this opportunity to get insight and feedback and bring it into product development. It's a different modality than selling. It's about listening, not pushing, but there it is. There's an opportunity. There's lots of knowledge, lots of client interaction. So what it looks like for them is very different to what it looks like for an engineer who's building products, but needs to know that context in order to make macro and micro decisions, has some agency in terms of looking at usage analysis and perhaps getting with customers, but not as much as a salesperson, of course. So the program looks very different for them. And we'll talk about those differences as we go through. The other thing to note is that it's not just about methods or about process or about a toolkit or about awareness raising. It's all of those things, and it's embedding this customer focus motif in almost every aspect of organizational life. So to give an example of that, in engineering, there is a line item in the performance evaluation metrics that says customer focus. And so with that part of the organization, we've ran sessions, workshops with engineer leaders and managers about how do you coach an individual engineer about being customer focused? How do you review a program to ensure that it is in fact being customer focused? And so that kind of gives you a flavor of the depth that we're going to and the breadth that we're going to in making this happen. So we've taken a very much a kind of change approach to this. I'll just mention this briefly. It's not the main focus of this session here. The main focus is number 4 here, which is where you all are trying to enable this kind of focus to occur. But just to let you know, establishing the need for all this, getting that participative, volunteer-based team together, being clear what we're trying to accomplish, then actually doing some stuff, but then following that up with some wins. And we have this big kind of part of what we're doing is people who are doing all this stuff sharing their experiences with other people who are trying to do it. So there's what we call the LAOC stories sessions, and then keep going and keep that momentum and get better and better. And then number 7 is really where you start to put the cherry on the cake, where you're measuring the impact of this, which is synonymous with how do we measure the value that we're creating for customers. And that's kind of where we're at now. So just to let you know that this is quite a deep and broad program, and we're very kind of multifaceted in how we're trying to do this over a sustained period of time. So just one thing I couldn't resist sharing a chart to make myself look more intelligent, but this is a really interesting set of studies by IBM, a little bit old now, about 10 years or so old now, but still very, very valid and probably the same ratios. Their point was if you spend $1 to change something in a project, in a program during design, it will cost you $100 to make that change when the thing is in production, when it's in maintenance mode. So it's 100 times. We know this instinctively, but it's nice to see some numbers around it. And a lot of things that happen in Bloomberg actually precede this kind of application development phase. So you can think about our data teams, which are bringing all that content into the Bloomberg terminal, millions of data points every single day coming into our product to be leveraged by our community. Their success affects this success at a way further granularity. So $1 spent there is going to be $1,000 in maintenance if they get it wrong. So their focus on customers is just as important. And it's kind of a paradox of an organization, if you think about it, that the further away from the customer interface, the less likely you will have knowledge about the customer. Yet the opportunity for you to affect the value to the customer is the greatest. So LAOC is very much about including all of those folks who are building infrastructure platforms and creating data sets and making sure they understand the customer context and are connected to those that are with customers on a daily basis. All right, so the focus, I'm going to focus mostly on LAOC that we've been working on with product managers, because I think that's the most relevant part. And this shows you part of that discovery phase. The product managers in one-to-ones talked about some of the challenges they face, how they do customer research today, or yesterday, I should say. And they kind of identified the seven sins, as we call it. And then we surveyed a bunch of them, and 86 responded. And this was the data from that experience, that assuming the customer will be able to actually say what they need is a challenge. Relying just on anecdotes rather than good data from different methods is another. Solving a particular symptom rather than the underlying problem, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to solve for with the customer, with the Learning About Our Customers program. And another way to think about it is we're human beings, and therefore we are inherently and implicitly biased. We couldn't function unless we were biased. We filter what we see, we filter what we recall, we lean towards different perspectives. And so the software development lifecycle is no exception to the influence of bias, just in the same way as the news cycle is susceptible to the influence of bias. It's the same human beings bringing the same cognitive functioning. And this, I'm just trying to illustrate here some of the types of bias that can happen at different phases of a life cycle. So when a project kicks off, the hippo, if you're familiar with that, the highest paid person in the room might say, this is the way I think we should do it. And there's authority bias because, hey, they're successful and they've done all this stuff before. They must know what they're doing. So the hot hand fallacy is from basketball, where you keep scoring hoops, people assume that you're going to keep scoring. It's not necessarily the case. And then everyone wants it to succeed. That's optimism bias. And it goes on and on through this cycle. And there are many, many other forms of bias other than the ones I'm listing here. The big one, of course, is confirmation bias, which we're all very familiar with now, given that social media kind of and different kind of news outlets kind of pushes into that bubble, and we like to stay there, don't we? So that's happening in software development as much as it is in those spheres. So important to think about it that way, and that being more robust, reliable, systematic in how we learn from customers and bring that into software development is a way to manage that bias, to balance our natural tendencies to lean a certain way. All right, so just a couple more thoughts on what is the benefit of being more customer focused. So I hope I've got you thinking about the first one, which is how do we build a better product by bringing this into our thinking and being disciplined about it. That's the obvious one, to be honest, is obviously if we understand the customer, we stand a better chance of giving them what they need. If we understand the customer, we get a better chance of getting sponsorship for what we're trying to do, because we can tell a clear story of the need and the value, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not the biggest benefit. In my experience of doing this program, a bigger benefit is by having that clarity, the team is not just sharing an objective. We're all trying to do this thing. We're trying to deliver this project. We're all sharing what that means to the customer. And I was telling a story earlier about taking an engineer to see a customer for the first time a couple of years ago. And quite a profound experience for him, because he'd been working on this thing for a couple of years, and then suddenly he got it. He understood. The customer took him through everything that he does with his application, and he, finally, it was visceral kind of realization that there is a human being on the other end of my creativity. And we left that meeting, and he was quite shaken, and we had to have a sit down in the nearest coffee shop while he was absorbing what had just happened. His life had suddenly become enriched with meaning, and I don't say that lightly. And that's kind of the second and the third one here is the more context you understand, the more value that you appreciate, the better it is for teams in terms of collaboration, the better it is for individuals in terms of knowing why they're doing the thing they're doing in a very deep way. I at a town hall meeting for engineering not so long ago, a couple of years ago now, I asked the audience, put your hand up if you understand the objective of the project, and everyone put their hands up. And I just think of a project that you're working on, and I said, well, leave your hand up if you understand the customer need that objective will meet, and we're down to about 60%. And then I said, well, think about, do you understand the value that creates for the customer? It's a need, but what is it? Why is it important to them? What does it actually give them in terms of the things that they care about? And now we're down to about 20%. And then I asked, do you have a way to measure whether or not that value is being delivered? And we're down to a few. So, I then said, who works on a fantastic product, who works on an okay product, and who works on a poor product? And we kind of got a bell curve, right? And the hypothesis is, not just a hypothesis, is that the reason that we're on an okay, not a great product is we don't know what it's for in a deep, meaningful way. And that's part of what this program has been about, is trying to enhance that sense of meaning. All right. So when we say, I keep saying customer value, don't I? So what do I mean by that? So breaking it down to this simple framework: effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. Effectiveness is about the outcome the customers are looking for. So they have jobs to do, they have tasks to complete. Are we attempting to improve their outcomes, so making them more effective? Efficiency is about the means with which they go about doing that in terms of resources, time, clicks, cost, etc., etc. Is the value proposition to get them to be more efficient? And then satisfaction is another way to think about those other two, but also there's lots of other things kind of imbued inside that sentiment. Plus, it makes a lot of sense to triangulate, and they're not always the same thing. You can have a product that makes you more effective and efficient, but people are dissatisfied because it's 10 times the price. So that's the kind of simple framework that we've been using. We're going to use this in a second. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about the details of the program in product managers when we come back from this little exercise. But I want to give you a chance to start playing around with some of these concepts. Now, I don't mean to say that you don't focus on value already. Of course you do. But we're just going to play around with something that the organization has produced as a tool to help keep our discipline around this and see how it works out for you. So these are what we're calling the 10 questions. We didn't find them on a tablet. They weren't written in stone, but they are accumulating a kind of mythical status, which is great. They didn't come from me or anyone working on the LAOC program. They came from the participants, and they are a little different depending on the organization that they came from. The first 5 are the same. They're about customers in a kind of abstract way. You can apply them to any product, to any customer endeavor. The second 5, that's where we get a bit of variation between engineering and data and sales, etc., because they have a different context, they have different primary objectives, and that comes through in the second 5 questions. But they're always through the lens of the first 5, through the lens of customer value. Okay, so that's where these 10 questions came from. So just real quick to go through them. The first is about what is the need that the product is trying to fulfill. The second question goes deeper to say, why is that important to the customer? What's the value of it? Third is about the current situation. How do they solve that problem or fulfill that need today? How do they fulfill it with your proposed solution? What's the delta? How are you going to measure if the value is actually being delivered? That's the first 5. The second 5 here, I think this is from the data team. Are we actually prioritizing based on value as one of the vectors? Of course, not the only vector that we make prioritization decisions on, but it's an important one to draw through. Are we reusing, or could we reuse what we're doing that's also trying to deliver that value now that we've got that clarity of what it is? Are we connecting? Very, very important for Bloomberg. Remember that diagram of all the different bits and pieces? One of the primary challenges we face is that we've been very, very successful at doing all the pieces. And to go to the next level of value, one of our biggest challenges is integrating it together so that it becomes more seamless and more workflow orientated. So making those relationships based on value is very, very important aspect to this. Number 9 is then now starting to think about the implications of delivering that value for our ongoing operations. And then 10 is about, kind of closes the loop. What is the process by which you've done all these things? Do you have a customer learning plan in place? Have you been doing some research activities, if it makes sense, et cetera, et cetera? So these are the 10 questions. So what we'll do now, why don't we break into pairs? And we're going to put these instructions in the chat so you'll have them when you teleport into pairs. Volker is going to make that magic happen in a second. But essentially, take it in turns to talk about a project or program that's foremost in your mind or is really important to you right now. And the other person is going to ask you 3 of the 10 questions. And those 3 questions are, firstly, to talk about the value that the program you're working on is trying to deliver. What's the value proposition? Secondly, why is the thing that you're looking to deliver going to be better than what customers can already do? And then thirdly, are you prioritizing that project according to that value? Are you being accountable to it, in other words, in the aspect of prioritization? And then switch. So if we do a total of 15 minutes and you spend about 6 or 7 minutes each asking the 3 questions or being the person talking about their project. But as you're doing that, think about a couple of things. Be honest. This is a safe place. If I ask the interviewers, the person asking the question, to push a little bit, and so don't take the first answer about value. It's like, well, why is that? Well, why is that? Ask why a couple of times, and just stretch it out a little bit to see. So if someone keeps responding with the same as the objective of the project, right? I often do this. It's like, well, what is the objective? Well, we're going to deliver this feature. Well, why are you delivering that feature? So that people will have the feature, and you get in this loop, and it's like, no, wait, what's the feature for, and why is it important to the customer? So that's just push a little bit on that one, and note what was easy and what was hard. Also, I would suggest really listen to the answers, because you'll get a lot from the way in which other people go about answering these questions. Maybe it's not quite the same way that you would think about these questions. And so anyway, have fun with it. Volker will hit the magic button, then we'll paste not just the instructions here, but also these the 3 questions in gold here. There are sub-questions that kind of help explain them a bit more. I don't think you need that. I think it's overcomplicating it a little bit. So we'll just have the 3 questions in the chat as well. So Volker, do your magic. Make us all disappointed.
All right.
15 minutes will come back again. So
I've just pasted the 3 questions into the chat. And then for anybody who wanted just a repeat of the instructions, they're just below it. And in a minute, we'll find yourself.
Well, you can.
All right, so I will send you off, and then we'll get Maya up to speed. All right, I think we have pretty much everybody back.
All right, excellent. Good to have you all back again. how was that? Does anyone want to share their experience of that episode? Any thoughts on what just happened? You all get through the questions and switch?
Yes, I'm still kind of processing. I was so involved in the actual answering questions and then asking questions. I'm still kind of doing the meta processing from a experience perspective, what it was like.
Yeah, and did you find that your partner approaches the answers to the questions in a different way to how you did? You know, there's always a different angle to kind of come at these questions from. Did you press on the why to get to the reason that people care about this thing that we're working on? Did you have much fun, safe zone with that?
I could have probably pushed harder. I did some.
Yeah, Lena makes an excellent point that asking somebody why can come across as quite invasive. You know, why are you doing that? I don't know, it just puts you on the defensive, doesn't it? So, Alina, what was your alternative to asking why?
What?
Yeah.
What
Just
would bring? What makes it important? What difference does it make? Or how is it different from what we have? How is the benefit the customer?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. You don't have to push on the why. For those who have children, you'll know that the limit of your capacity to absorb whys is finite. And expires around about 3. I always found with my kids, it's like, because I told you to, you know. Now you can't say that in a project meeting. So I was talking with a product manager about it, and the summation we came to was it's somewhere between 2 and 3 why questions, and then you become annoying. So Alina's suggestion is great. It just disguise your why question with something else. Any other thoughts to share from that experience?
I thought a few of our answers kind of where I could get to the second topic, and they say, well, you sort of answered it in the first topic, right? Some of the if you've described your why, you know, it sort of describes your opportunity or something, that does cover the thing. And some of the prioritization, right? We're doing this because it's a need, and here's this opportunity they have, and it's like the number one thing customers are asking for if you've really thought it through.
Yeah, it's a great point. Labeling things, even in a simple inquiry about why, and it is problematic. You know, if you think about things like OKRs, objectives and key results, it's just a new iteration of KPIs, and the whole TQM movement from back in the day was all about being clear on your objectives and have them measurable, and it's just a rehash. But as soon as you label something as an objective, then my objective is not the same level as your objective, and it makes it very difficult for us to talk about it because your version is not the same as mine. And so simplifying that with just simple questions like why and how is a great way to kind of normalize the conversation. This whole point is making me think about a slide, which I'm just going to paste in before I share. There we go, paste that in. This may be useful, maybe. I call this the hierarchy of doing. Now think about this. This is a very simple way of having a conversation with somebody about what they're working on. You can join at any level. Just say, tell me about what you're doing. And then if you want to go up a level to what's it for, you just ask why. Or some Alina's alternative of tell me what that would do for people, and, you know, softer ways of asking why takes you up. Asking how you're doing that, can you tell me a bit more detail about how that's happening, takes you down. And so all you're doing with those 2 different questions is creating this hierarchy of doing. And so you can start at any level and you can flesh out this map and then have a conversation with another team, start anywhere, go up and down until you fleshed it out. And that's an easier way for them to join together in a normalized way, rather than here's my OKRs and here's my OKRs and it doesn't quite fit and we can't get a communication going. It's just a thought about labels. As soon as we use labels, it makes it harder for the conversation to happen. Anyway, all right, so let's talk about integrating in programs. This is the LAOC program that was focused on product managers, and we looked at different ways. If you're familiar with UX research, then this will be familiar to you. Different ways to do the learning about customers. 6 different methods, which I won't go into in detail here, but they're complementary. They get you different kinds of data. Interviewing is particularly important, and by that I just mean the having unbiased questions. Remember that thing about bias. Making those questions relate to the objectives of the project and what we're trying to learn, managing the conversation with open-ended questions. It's that kind of stuff, which we won't go into detail here. But there's all these different ways in which you could practice learning throughout the life cycle of a project. But it's also foundational in terms of coming up with a learning plan. So you're on a program right now. You've just talked about some examples backwards and forwards. Maybe there were some gaps in your answers to the questions, which then say, okay, now we've got questions about this program that we would like to flesh out, or we would like to make sure they're still true as we continue to build out something and get feedback from customers. And so by being clear on the value, you can establish the questions that you have about value. Is it the right thing to do? Are we doing the thing the right way? That sets up some research questions. And then you can think about different methods that would be beneficial to get answers to those questions. And when you plot that onto a program, you're then essentially building a customer learning plan for your effort, right? So that's one of the main things that we've been doing with product managers, is getting them to think about value, think about the questions that raises to increase confidence, lower risk, and then think about methods to triangulate answers to those questions. That's a customer learning plan, integrated into your program, and off you go. So that's one way in which you can integrate all of this into a project. And what might that look like? So here is I'm just going to slideshow mode. So here is a very simple life cycle of a project, 3 phases. And here's how those methods are helping to contribute to customer learning. So this is one thing you can do. Imagine that the project is very light. Maybe it's a known product and we're adding some new features. It might look a lot lighter, something like this perhaps. And again, it's all contextual. It's not a mandatory thing to do this research activity. It's what kind of confidence are we looking to create? What are the unknowns? What are the consequences of failure? All these are questions to kind of help shape this customer learning plan. But I'm just showing you here some examples of how that happened. So now, in addition to methods and a customer learning plan, here's some other ways, 5 different ways that you could integrate customer focus as you go through a life cycle of a project. So that first one is the exercise we just had about being clear about the customer. The 10 questions helps with that. Second one we mentioned already, which is establishing a customer learning plan. The third is, okay, well, we're doing some learning. We're using methods, we're answering questions. Bring that into the documentation. If you're using tickets, if you're using a board, whatever the way in which you're going about managing a program, just make sure that that learning is feeding into that. You know, there are statements about the value proposition, potentially. There are statements about key customer context. There are statements about migrating customers and the challenges there. Bring all of that learning into the documentation so it starts to persist, and helping, like that engineer I told you about that went to see the customer. It helps those folks throughout the project that need to understand that context, in some cases to just make micro decisions, but they'll make them more effectively if they know why. And then as the learning continues throughout the life cycle, just holding yourself accountable to prioritizing and refining against that. And then finally, as you're delivering as another version of that, hopefully at that point, the refinements are a lot less, but the learning shouldn't end there, because now it's about taking that learning and feeding it into the next cycle for that product. So you start to realize that this learning process is continuous. And that would be the thing that I would leave you with in terms of integrating with process. So just kind of taking those 5 steps. I'll share these slides with you, obviously, not getting you to try and remember all this, but here are some ways in which you can be clear about the customer. We've mentioned a few of them. Here are some ways in which you can establish that learning plan. Here's some ways I mentioned to incorporate into documentation, problem statements, epics in Jira, briefs, design docs, just making sure that all of that is flowing through into the things the artifacts you're using to manage a project. I mentioned objectives and key results as well. That's another key area where there should, we're going through that kind of process at Bloomberg in our product development areas to bring in, OKRs is another way to think about what we're achieving. And LAOC is helping with that so that where appropriate, and it's usually appropriate to almost everything, what's the customer angle in this objective? What is the value we're trying to create? So it's not just defined as a project, it's defined as value to the customer. So that's the difference there. And if you read any document, and look, I've been doing product design, software development for 35 years. Some of those projects I've led myself. Every single project, whether I led or I didn't, loses its focus on the customer value you're trying to create at some point. Some may not have been clear on it before they started, and maybe that's okay. But I think the reason for that is that we, as humans, we have a lot more apps in our head for executing projects than we do for asking why we're doing it in the first place. Maybe that's because that capability evolved the last in our cognitive development. But nevertheless, it's kind of easy for us to forget that focus. So bring it into the documentation. And then some more here about doing that prioritization and refinement, bringing in the methods that you're using during those phases and incorporating it as a team. Remember that the 3 benefits, and the middle one is about teamwork. Get the team involved in all this so that they start to feel the customer presence in what they're doing. The whole thing is enriched with that sense of value. And similarly, when a product is kind of delivered and you're now evaluating it, there's no way you can evaluate customer value unless you were clear on what the value proposition was in the first place, and then kept validating and addressing that as you went through. How are you going to measure what you weren't clear on? So it's very important to think about value as driving the end state as well as it is about starting with the start state. Okay, so I'm not going to suggest we do it because we're getting a bit short on time here. We've been going for about an hour. We'll skip this second exercise, but maybe it's something that you can do as homework. So think about those 5 ways you could integrate into a project. I'm sure you're doing some of them already. Could you be doing a bit more? Would it make sense to do a bit more in terms of bringing a bit more customer focus? And I just wanted to share with you, I kept mentioning that we focused on product development and product managers in terms of what LAOC has been doing, but this is what it looks like in engineering. Obviously, we need some role-playing characters. I don't know why we ended up there. It's just, as I said, it's very participative, and that's what they chose to illustrate. But for the engineers, for the individual engineers, the track is about realizing that this is part of my job, realizing that this is an expectation, and what's the benefit to me of being more customer focused. So a big piece on that. Big piece on building relationships with other people in the company, in sales, in service, in other engineering teams with product managers. And then a big emphasis now, their main track is about usage analysis, instrumentation, taking agency to contribute to product development through understanding what customers are doing today. And then there's a track for managers, which I mentioned. So setting expectations, follow-up, all around customer focus. And now we have this other track for what do you do when you have internal customers? How does that change? Yes, we can leverage some of this stuff, but it's a partnership. It's not a paying relationship. It's not transactional. So, and we're just kicking off that actually next week. So yeah, looks very, very different than the product management track. So one last thought to leave you with. We're at the hour mark. We can go a bit longer with some Q&A, but just one last thought for you is this was a picture I took on a hike I took when I was in the London area earlier this year. And it made me think about context. You know, we've been talking about customer focus. We've talked about questions to ask. We've talked about ways to keep bringing that into product development. And I think the reason why that manifesto principle number 1 has remained so elusive is because it's a complex problem to solve. You know, you think about software development lifecycle as a product itself, it's a complex product. It's not just about the application, the product, it's about the context of use, business processes, organization, the environment, competition, you know, all of these vectors kind of affect, and it's very much like an ecosystem. And so bringing in more customer focus through the kind of things that we've just been talking about, think about that in the context of your particular ecosystem. So, and that change framework that I suggested is, so what's going to work here? Who should I get to engage with here on this topic? What would be the biggest impact? What would be the biggest value? So it gets a bit meta, you know, because now we're talking about this whole thing as a product itself. But think about what are the problems I'm trying to solve by being more customer focused? What is the value I'm trying to create? What's the best way to execute against that value in my context, in my situation? And just leverage whatever makes sense to you. You know, none of this is mandatory, optional, and it should therefore be contextual. So just kind of one last thought to leave you with before we break for some questions. Oh, yeah. So any questions about that? Any points anyone else wanted to make?
I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
Which is you talked about the problem of losing focus on the customer during a project. And one thing that I've been doing for many years is creating the press release before anything else in the project. And that is a really good North Star to go back and sort of look at and, okay, that's what we're doing. That's the benefit. These are the key features. Everything else is not really important.
Yeah, it is a great artifact. It's you could write it as a value proposition, you could write it as a hypothesis, you could write it as, but it is a really neat. It just feels really powerful, doesn't it, to say, well, what would we say about this when we're trying to promote it? And if you think about it, what you're going to say about it is the value proposition, right? What we're going to tell you why this is going to really be awesome for you, right? And then work all the way back to the start and say, okay, if that's what we're trying to offer at the end, what questions do we have about that? Is that real? Is that value actually exist in the world? Do people actually care about that? So first, let's ask why. Then let's ask how. So assume that it is. What's the best way to execute against that in order to make it real? And then just progress from there. It is a great way, because if you don't have that, it's okay to be in a mode where we can't write that now because we're not sure. But you be mindful about that. You realize as a team, look, this is a bit of a high-risk project, right? We have some vague notion of what that press statement might say. We've got a feeling that there's something here, but we're not entirely confident there's your set of questions, and there's the foundation of your research to kind of get there. But be mindful of that. Then the hippo comes along and says, "Oh, no, this is a great idea. No problem. I've got all this money." So, you know, but you can't accept that. You know, it's important to raise the confidence and lower the risk. And it's not just so you can have a successful product. It's so that you can have a team of people that can work collectively and powerfully on a very clear customer-focused objective. And you can have individuals who want to leap out of bed in the morning because they know what they're doing is helping another human being on the planet. And I kind of typified that effect. Bear with me 1 second. Think about the last time you made something good, or you thought it was going to be good. It just clicked. It could be anything. It's like you put a slide together and it's, oh, yes, that's rather good. Or you went, yes, I've got it. This is it. I think this is the, or you actually delivered it and customers get feedback. And remember that feeling, right? It starts in your stomach and it goes up into your head. And it's like this sort of quality. It's the experience of quality. That's when you create something. Now, remember the last time you consumed something that was of high quality. It could be a meal. It could be a product that you're holding. It could be a service experience. But it's like they knew I was coming. How did they know that this was exactly what I wanted to do? How did they know that I did one and then here was two waiting for me and then there was three as well? Look at that. That you get a feeling in your stomach that goes up through the back of your neck. It's the same feeling. The human emotion associated with the creation of quality and the consumption of quality is the same visceral response. And I wager that the best companies on this planet have a connection between those creating and those consuming via the same human emotion, and they know it, right? They might not know them individually. It's great if they do, but they just know each other exists. They know that this company has my interests in mind. They care about me. The people creating care about me. And those people doing the creating know there's somebody who appreciates it on the other end. And the companies that have that connection, that silver cord of quality, as I call it, are the best companies in terms of profitability and the best companies to work for. So what we've been describing today is one small set of measures you can take to nurture that silver cord of quality.